We're talking about the book of Revelation. We've just gone through the 7 stages to what is commonly called enlightenment. And all is also comparable in the Bailey writings to the 3rd initiation, where in the 3rd initiation, examples of it was Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus, where he was enlightened, and Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, where his body glowed like the sun, and Moses on Mount Sinai, when he come down, his body glowed like the sun. I don't think everyone that achieves a 3rd initiation glows like the sun. I think that's a possibility. Their inner being will glow like the sun, but it may not be visible to regular friends and family, so to speak. But anyway, the disciple goes along so far, and he gets caught. Well, he begins to free himself from these outer authorities, and then he goes through these 7 stages where he goes in and out of being controlled by these outer forces. And finally, he gets stabilized in the soul, and he thinks, I've got it made, and he starts gliding along, and his inner Christ tells him, no, you don't really have it made. You have a powerful decision to make, and you can't just be lukewarm. You got to make a decision, go forward or backward. And so he's told that he's really just beginning. And so he finally, if he makes the decision to go forward, then he goes into part 2 of the book of Revelations, beginning with chapter 4. And the heavens are open. The heavens represent higher consciousness. So he goes from a point to where he's pretty much a standard seeker to a point to where he has a higher consciousness open to his vision. And it begins with this verse. And after this, I looked, and a door was open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was as it were a trumpet talking with me, which said, come up hither, and I will shew thee things which must be hereafter. And immediately I was in the spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. So he finally reaches a crucial point to where a door was open in heaven. Now, before we go into this, I want to say that people have interpreted the book of Revelations in many different ways. And to interpret these type of things correctly, we have to follow what is called the law of correspondences. Now, the trouble with interpreting symbols, a lot of people interpret symbols to mean just whatever they want them to mean. But oftentimes in interpreting symbols, they don't follow the law of correspondences, because in the law of correspondences, one part of the description has to correspond to another part. And what a lot of people do is they'll take one line out of a paragraph and find something that seems to correspond, but the other parts of the writings don't correspond. And so, there's a flaw there. And the law of correspondences in interpreting symbols, they may not be exactly perfect, but they will roughly correspond in wholeness, just not in part. A good example of the interpretation, kind of a wrong interpretation, is when they had the problem with the nuclear reactor in Chernobyl. some scholars got together and they says, well, you know, they're in Chernobyl, there's a plant there similar to wormwood, and it's wormwood, and it's called Chernobyl. And so this could be a sign that that fulfills a prophecy of wormwood, where it talks about a star from heaven falling to the earth and polluted, made a third of the waters of the earth like wormwood, and it killed 1/3 of the inhabitants of the sea, so to speak. And so a lot of Christians thought that the nuclear explosion in Chernobyl was fulfilling that prophecy. But there was just one tiny part that corresponded. Nothing else really corresponded. There was nothing that fell from the sky. There was nothing that polluted the waters of the ocean. And so there was no wholeness in the correspondence there. And so when a person approaches and interprets by the law of correspondences, you just can't extract one thing that seems to harmonize and figure that's the fulfillment of the prophecy. And this is what many people do in interpreting, especially the book of Revelations. You read about any crisis that develops, you'll have preachers come forward and say, oh, this is fulfilling what this angel in the book of Revelation was doing, or this is the second seal or the fourth seal. And they will, they have been saying this since I was a kid, you know, and none of them has transpired the way they think about the end of the world coming. But now the same thing with the Ukraine situation we're having now. All kinds of people are saying, oh, this is fulfilling the book of Revelations. And then they give detail here and there how it's fulfilling the book of Revelations. But just a little tiny bit seems to correspond, but not all of it. But where they're missing the boat is the book of Revelations is a description about the progress of the disciple from just being a regular seeker to progressing to becoming like Christ and even beyond. So it's really an instruction book, and we're not going to see it happen 100% literally. Every once in a while, we will see some things happen that will make people say, this must be the fulfillment of the book of Revelations. But the exact literal fulfillment of the whole thing will be on the inner part of the seeker's being. That's where it will literally be fulfilled. So it says, after this I looked, and behold, a door was open in heaven. What was the door that was open in heaven? What was that? Anybody read the book? The door, heaven is higher consciousness. Contact symbolizes contact with the Christ within. And there's a barrier between us and the Christ within. And the barrier, the door that has to be open, is soul contact that removes the barrier between heaven and earth. And this is what happens when a person reaches this enlightenment, is the door. He discovers. Now before this, he's felt some soul contact, but he hasn't really made the breakthrough to where he's really felt the higher energies of the soul. So first of all, you have to understand there's two meanings of soul as is talked about in the various sacred and esoteric works. One is your higher self, and the second is soul energy. What is soul energy? Who wants to answer that? I bet Joshua knows the answer to that.
Well, what's written about it says it's the interplay of matter and spirit. And DK at one point says the soul is the son of necessity.
Yeah. So the word soul is a confusing word for many because it's used in so many different contexts in different writings. They speak of the soul as if it's the higher self, and other times the soul as if it's pure spiritual energy, and it's really both. But there's a difference between the two. One is soul energy. And sometimes when people say the soul, they're just talking about soul energy. And other times when people are talking about the soul, these are people that know what they're talking about. They're talking about the higher self, which is in contact with the innermost part of your being. And that's the point of contact. What makes this contact possible is soul energy. And the soul energy is the point where matter meets spirit, and it interplays. And that interplay of spirit and matter produces soul. In the realm of pure spirit, we have our monads. And our monads are connected to pure spirit, and they do not descend down into the physical realm, but they project. And the projection of the monad creates the causal body, the body for a higher self, and then it projects down to the physical realm. So the interplay between spirit and matter produces the realm of soul, wherein resides our higher self. And it resides in a place where there's an interplay of spirit and matter. And it produces for the monad a window, so it can be aware of what's happening clear down to the physical plane. Okay. So what does the door in heaven have to do with Christ? And that is this door within ourselves. We all have the Christ consciousness within ourselves. And in the Bible, it calls Christ the mediator between God and man. And people interpret that to mean the man Jesus is mediating between every person on earth and God, whereas it's really the Christ principle. And of course, a master like the Christ can be in tune with that to a large degree. But the Christ principle, which is in yourself, that Christ center, is the mediator between you and everything that's higher, that we call God. Okay, why did the voice, it says the voice, there was a door open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me. Why was the voice sounded like a trumpet? What does that mean? What's the purpose of the trumpet in the army?
It's to wake you up.
Right, wake you up. And the word trumpet.
The trumpet.
Yeah.
They say a trumpet in the army is a signal, and there's different signals to give different commands.
Yeah, that's true. And the word trumpet here comes from the Greek salpix, which means or implies to shake or disturb. and you're sleeping soundly, and all of a sudden that trumpet goes off, and it's kind of a disturbing sound. It brings you to attention. And so the voice was like a trumpet. So in other words, we're telling us, we're being told here that at this point of enlightenment, the door is open, the barrier between you and the higher self, the Christ self, is removed, and you hear the inner voice like a trumpet. And that tells us that, boy, this really wakes you up. So think of Paul on the road to Damascus, and think of he heard the voice of Christ. And do you think that woke him up like a trumpet? Now, it could have all been something that happened within his own core being, as far as that goes. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it wasn't outside of himself the way it's portrayed. Maybe it was totally inside of himself. But whether inside or outside, he recognized it as the voice of Christ, and it was like a trumpet. It woke him up, that all of a sudden he would become aware of things he was not aware of before. The trumpet is used in a number of different places. Here's one we're kind of looking forward to as far as the lights go. And when Jesus was talking about the end of the age, and he says, he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather the elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now, the word angels really is translated from a word meaning messengers. That doesn't mean angels are going to come down from heaven. It just means that messengers will be sent out to gather people, and they'll have a voice like the sound of a trumpet. In other words, there will be tremendous alarm. So something will happen in the future that will cause great disturbance on the earth and give people a reason to gather. Right now, they haven't, in the past 100 years, they haven't really had much reason to gather, and the lights haven't. We are gathering on the internet, and the internet is a great place for us to lay the foundation. So the messengers will gather the elect. They won't sound a trumpet like a musician playing a musical instrument, but they'll have a message that permeates the people that are in contact, that have any degree of soul contact to the core.
Hey, JJ.
Yeah.
Actually, if we look at it, people are gathering now. People are gathering in small groups, big groups, just like our group here of Goodwill. And it's happening all over the world. So the trumpet has already sounded, so to speak. We're at this point in world evolution where everybody's gathering for causes that are higher up on the evolutionary ladder, the spiritual evolutionary ladder. So
Yeah.
that's what I feel.
To a degree, that's true, but they haven't sounded the alarm where they actually have physically gathered to create a city of light. And that's what will happen in the future, is that there will be cities of light that are actually built by the gathering of the elect. How far in the future that is, it's hard to say, but we're laying the foundation of that now. And you might want to read my book, The Gathering of Lights, where we talk about that, because what's interesting about that is the gathering principle is taught probably more in the Bible than almost anything else. Yet no one is teaching about it. Now, the early Mormon church taught about it, but then after they gathered in Salt Lake, they forgot about the gathering principle. And so they don't really teach it anymore. They teach that the gathering is just gathering together in church, basically. But even though one of their articles of faith is focused on the gathering. Okay.
JJ, how does the trumpet stuff apply to the individual disciple?
That's a good question, because there will be eventually trumpets sounded periodically to gather the lights for different purposes, but it also affects the individual disciple and the fact that he hears this voice, and the voice has the sound of a trumpet, and it's to wake him up. Like Paul on the road to Damascus, he heard the voice of Christ, and it woke him up. It completely changed him from, he was very sincere in what he was doing. He thought he was doing God's work and persecuting the Christians, but he found out that his belief in doing that was an illusion. And he had to transfer from what's illusionary to what was real. And this is what happens when the disciple reaches this point, is he all of a sudden he faces the things that he has believed maybe all his life, which are entirely wrong. And he has to reconstruct it to refocus on what is actually true. And it takes the sound of a trumpet, a shaking, for the disciple to make that shift. Has anyone here had that experience in their life? Maybe you haven't had total enlightenment, but you probably had something happen in your life that shook you to the core and changed your mind and your direction in life. Anybody had that happen to them?
Oh, I did.
Everybody has to some degree anyway. Okay, tell us about it, Scott.
Oh, I already did. It was my experience I had last year.
Oh, okay. And so anyway, this happens to seekers periodically until you have a big happening at this particular point, to where you confront what is called the angel of the presence, your higher self, and you have a revelation of your illusions, that what you thought in the past wasn't right, and it has to be reset. And this is the hardest thing to do. Like, look at Putin, for instance, invading Ukraine. Let's suppose that it continues to go bad for him. You think he's going to admit, hey, I was wrong, I need to readjust everything? No, he's probably never going to admit he's wrong, because it is almost impossible for the average person, if he's got an investment of time and capital in something, he doesn't want to admit he was wrong. You just don't see people, when they follow a course, especially where it involves a strong spiritual belief, they just don't stop and say, hey, I was wrong, I need to go another direction. And they just don't do that unless they're forced to do it. They need a sound of a trumpet to wake them up, to change directions. Yeah. Anyone else had a wake-up call before? Let's see who else we can pick on. I bet other people have had a wake-up call. Let's see. Trouble is, most of you guys,
This is,
are pretty awake. But go ahead, Joshua.
yeah, I had something, I guess it's not as extreme as this, but it's somewhat similar. So when I was moving around, I stayed with a friend of the family. I was in the car with him driving in San Francisco. And what did he say? Somehow the thing about gas prices came up, and I just accepted the global warming narrative at the time. I think I was like early 20s. And I was like, oh, well, you know, maybe this will incentivize people to get electric cars, or, you know, something like, oh, we can deal with global warming because gas prices are going higher. And when I said that, I felt like this constriction in my throat or something. And yeah. And yeah, so I, you know, just sort of put that on the shelf, or somewhat considered it, you know, it didn't go too far. But then I think maybe a year or two later, I watched uh, with my landlord, The Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. And I watched the whole movie with him. And, you know, everything in the movie intellectually seems like, oh, you know, we really have to do something. You know, this is important and that sort of thing. But I just felt no inner spiritual content to it, like at all. And those two experiences like convinced me that the global warming thing wasn't really real. That, and, you know, reading a whole bunch of other stuff, like things you said and other people.
Yeah, you know, every once in a while you hear people talk about, well, I used to be on the right or the left and I changed the directions. And to them, now it could have been right or wrong, because politics is a kind of a weird area to seek the truth in. But the fact that anyone changes political direction shows that they're at least trying to, they're at least open to change, because not too many people change their political direction because they're so, they have such an investment, especially if they're a political animal. A lot of people that change directions are people that just weren't paying attention a lot. Maybe they thought they believed a certain way, but found out maybe their party didn't really go along with them 100%. So, but you look at the people that really did change directions, had a strong belief and then changed. There are people that are quite far along the path. Same thing with religious people. If you grew up in a strong religious family and then you really bought into it all, and then you say change directions and get out of that religion and maybe go into alternative spiritual thought or something, that's a big change for people, and it's a big growth experience. And it takes the symbolic sound of a trumpet to cause a person to change directions. Now, sometimes they do it entirely for the wrong reason. Like some people leave Christianity because their parents forced them to go to church and they hated church. And so when they leave home, then they just rebel. And that's not really a changing a direction. That's more of an escape. But the actual changing of a direction, where the person really buys into the religious thought, and then he reaches a point to where he really examines it and he finds some things in it that just don't settle with the spirit, and he changes direction. It takes the sound of a trumpet for him to do that.
JJ, may I say comment on something?
Sure.
I had two major changes of direction in my life. I was an atheist. I was raised as an atheist, and I'm not anymore. And my political views were on the left, and now they are on the right, if you can sum it up. But there was no sudden trumpet sound in any of these. It was all gradual, from there to here.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, sometimes it is. If it's gradual, it probably means that you're kind of retracing some steps you took in past lives. because it's not taking a trumpet sound. It's not taking something really alarming to shift you. Now, but if the trumpet comes when in your past lives you have not made this transition before, the trumpet takes you to a place you've never been before. So that would be my guess on that, Soph, is that the place you're at now, you kind of move to where you're using things that you've learned in your past lives. When you get the sound of a trumpet, who knows where that'll take you, considering where you are now.
I had an experience that I've come to call the incoming light, and I don't really recall there being any trumpets. I was in my truck, but I don't recall hearing any sounds. I heard voices towards the end.
Yeah. But how old were you then?
28.
Was that you when you were with the Still group?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, how about when you left the Still group? Did that kind of take the sound of a trumpet to figure out that Richard wasn't everything he claimed to be, or whatever?
It's just another adventure for me. I mean, I've been involved in so many things in my life, and typically get involved in the upper echelons. I get some leadership positions and whatnot in life. I just take JJ or Richard with a grain of salt. The people that still live there in that community, they just call it his mistake.
Yeah, I remember you telling me how you were really doing everything you could to promote the group, and you're working hard in it and doing all these things, and then they came and kind of tried to take over what you're doing or something, take credit for it. And
Nothing like that.
how'd that happen?
I was an elected community mediator. We didn't have police or courts or anything, and that was our thing for that. We were elected, and I got the first case where it was a guy that was being thrown out of the house that he was renting from Stell Industries, when in fact, the reason for his not paying them was they hadn't paid him his salary for working in their factory. So I sat down with the president of Stell Industries and this complaint of in the office, and I listened to the guy, the plaintiff explain the story again, and I turned to the president and I said, now, we live out here in corn and soybean country, and if you date anybody's daughter in any of these local towns, everybody in the county knows about it the next day. So I said, now if people heard this story outside of these walls, how fast do you think the entire county would look down on this community? And he said, yeah, you're right. So he decided that they would not ask him for rent until they paid him his salary.
Yeah.
And because of that, I felt, that got back to Richard himself, and he's like afraid of, oh well, if my administrators can't be dictators anymore, that kind of diminishes their power, his and his other administrators' power, by the fact that I can take them, a person can take them to me in mediation. And it's like, hey, I didn't solve it. I brought them there for them to solve it between themselves.
Okay.
But they didn't take it very well at having somebody that could do that around them, I guess.
I guess you had it easy compared to these guys in Scientology. If you read some of their stories, boy, some of them, they went through all kinds of abuse and lost their kids and everything, and was alienated from them. And it took a tremendous amount of pressure of the sound of a trumpet, so to speak, before they finally woke up and realized they needed to leave. And but it's interesting reading some of those stories of the Scientologists. They have a tremendous hold on their people, and then when they try to leave, they're spied on, followed, and they have a heck of a time getting out of that organization. So that takes the sound of a trumpet for them to get out of that group and get some extra enlightenment. Okay, now we'll move on. It says a throne was set in heaven. What is the throne? There are two main places where the throne of God is, and that is the God with whom we have to do on this planet is the Ancient of Days, and his throne is set in the midst of the 7 planetary centers. There's 7 spirits before the throne of God, and these are represented by the 7 sacred planets. And upon the earth, there are 7 chimeras, and the central chimera represents the throne of God for the earth. Now, as far as the inner self, the throne of God is the third eye between the eyebrows, is where the connecting link is between us and the inner God, the soul. So this is where the throne is. And there are 24 spirits before the throne. Now, within the head center here, the crown of the head, there is a projection of the heart center. In the heart center, you have 12 petals, and then it's projected up into the head center of the crown. You have 12 petals there. So you have 2 heart centers, and each one of them with 12 petals, and the head center represents 12 male energy. The heart center represents 12 female energies. And so this is representative of that. And one sat on the throne. What's interesting, it doesn't describe the one that sits on the throne as being in physical form, but talks about his the lights around him. And we'll talk about more of this. I'll just read you the verse, and then we will talk about that next week. And he that sat upon the throne was to look upon like a jasper and sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. And round about the throne were 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their head crowns of gold. Is there anyone that would like to comment on that verse to start the class off next week? We have another volunteer. I bet you Tyler would want to volunteer. Can you be at the meeting next week at 10 a.m., Tyler?
I think I can be. So I would love to volunteer.
I just had that revelation that you wanted to volunteer.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead and cover that verse next week. Do you have the text of the unveiling?
I do. Let me just write down what you want me to, what chapter and verse are we?
Revelations 4:3-4. I'm not sure what page it's on because I don't.
Okay.
I just have a printout of what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, my friends, we will. Do you have any questions or comments before we wrap it up?
I do.
Okay.
The earlier, I want to make sure I get straight in my mind and understand correctly what you said earlier. Earlier, you said that when we all have a piece of God. When God, you know, expanded himself, and there's all a piece of God in each one of us. And that the source of spirit? And if so, is that the spirit that interplays with matter that produces the soul energy?
Yes, when you originally created, for want of a better word, God expanded himself, and God reflected himself, and you are a reflection in the image of God with all the attributes of God. And that means that you, in your original state, share the total consciousness and awareness and powers that God has. That's why when Christ awakened, he made this statement: all power in heaven on earth is given unto me. But that not just applies to him, it applies to anyone that wakes up to their true identity. They realize that all power in heaven and earth is theirs because they are in the image of God. And so, but we are limited down here. We're projected down, and as we have been projected down through layers of planes, we are in an extreme limitation, so we can play a game. It's a little bit, visualize it a little bit like playing football. In football, you have everything is limited to a 100-yard long field. Okay, even though the earth is 25,000 miles in diameter, the game is limited to just 100 yards. But it's limited that way for a reason, because that makes the game interesting. You can have rules and around that game and play within the limitation, and it makes it interesting. And so our self, which was unlimited in power, wondered what it would be like to have these limitations and what we could do in a limited situation. And this way we could play a game. When you're unlimited, you can't play any game, because two unlimited individuals cannot play a game with each other. But so we limited ourselves, and we came down here. And so when we are finished playing this game, then we will gradually awaken and go through degrees of awakening until we return to our source, which will be a complete return, will be quite some time in the future. But in the meantime, taking our next step in awakening and progressing will be extremely gratifying. And when you are taking that next step, it will just feel right with every fiber of your being. Okay, any more comments?
I'm not done with my question, JJ.
Okay.
So two parts to this question. Part one is I picture that part of God that's reflecting in us, that's a part of, that is God, continually generating this power like a piece of uranium radiating. And is it correct to picture it that way? Is it a continuous generating of power inside of us coming out?
It's not so much a generation, it's an accessing. Okay, so think
So
of
it's an access to God and the power that comes out.
Yeah, think of an electrical socket. There's all kinds of power available there. And if you have the right plug-in, you just plug it in and there's the power. It's right there. Now, you can plug in different devices. And maybe your computer just takes maybe 60 watts. You plug in an oven, it may take 1,500 watts, but that power is there. So you may be just using a handful of watts, or you may be using a whole bunch of watts, but whatever the case, all the power you need is there if you know how to plug in the right access codes, so to speak.
Got it.
And,
Final question.
okay.
Is this what we call faith? This power what we call faith?
It's access to faith. If you don't have faith that there's you got electricity, you're not going to plug anything in. So you have to have faith that it's going to be there. And that faith that's going to be there, you have to do a little bit of learning on your own, because
Well, are you using the word faith as the word interchangeable with belief? I thought faith was a power all by itself.
well, faith is, well, we probably ought to have a class just maybe on that, but you start out with a belief, and then faith is a test of that belief to find out whether or not that belief is actually true. So you may believe you got electricity, who knows, there may be, the power may be out. But to test it, you have to actually take action and plug something in and see if you got a power source there. Then when you got a power source, then you no longer have faith because you've tested it, and now you know that you have power there. Okay, so belief starts the process, faith finishes it off, and then you have knowledge after the exercise of faith. And you can.
So if we have faith the size of a mustard seed and we can move a mountain, then it starts with belief that we can do it? Because I thought faith would be the power that moved the mountain.
No, faith isn't actually the power that moves the mountain. Faith just opens the door. Let's go on the electrical socket again. Okay, you have a toaster oven you want to run. Okay, you believe you have electricity. Okay, you're not sure if there's been a power outage or not. So to test it, you exercise faith in your belief, and you test it out and you plug it in, and then you find out whether or not there's power there. That's a little bit different. That's going by what the Greek tells us that faith means. Faith isn't a blind belief. Faith is a test of a belief. And the test of the belief finds out whether or not your belief is true. Then when you find out your belief is true, then you can move the mountain. Then you find out you have unlimited power. Then you can command the mountain to be moved. But starting with the belief that you can do it, most people don't really believe they can move a mountain. Even those that accept it in theory, they don't accept it in reality. Okay.
So I'm sorry for keeping the class going this long, but one last question. So relate that to Peter walking on water. Can you explain that, how the process you just explained worked when Peter was walking on water?
Well, he when he saw Jesus walking on water, all of a sudden he believed that he could, and he tested the belief. He said, well, I'm going to try it out. So he tested it and he found out that he could. But then when he started thinking about it, he thought, do I really believe this? I mean, it happened so fast with Peter that everything happened fast. And so he didn't have time to think.
JJ, did Peter thinking about it create blockages that blocked what was happening? The power that walked on water?
Yes, the mind is the destroyer of the real, is like the Tibetan says. And the mind, by using its logic, and if the logic has some illusion within it, it can destroy your access to true reality. And this is what happened to Peter. Peter had the filters of the mind that normally block the real taken down because he saw Jesus walking on the water. Then he went and walked on the water and thought, this is cool. But then he thought, well, you know, I shouldn't really be able to do this. And when he thought that, he sunk because the mind destroyed the real for him. And so that was interesting. Okay, my friends, it's been a good group, and we will look forward to your seeing you next Sunday and posting your various meetings you're going to be having. And we will see you then.
Take care, JJ. Light and love, everyone.
Thank you.
So.
Thanks, JJ. See y'all.